Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's panel. I am so excited to be chatting with these amazing authors today. If you don't know what you're watching, we are going to be chatting all about 2025 debuts in the specific kind of genre speculative fiction realm today. If you don't know who I am, my name is Lily. I'm the three-dimensional person, I guess, behind Utopia State of Mind on the internet, and I'm the moderator for today. So we're going to have our authors introduce themselves, tell us about their books, and then we're going to jump into some questions that I had immediately after finishing. If anyone watching has any questions during the panel, please put them in the chat and I will try to get to them at the end. And I will periodically try to keep reminding anyone if you have any questions, because sometimes you just hear something you have to ask about. So I think that's all from me. Let's just start off now with our author introductions, starting with Lindsay.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me and letting me join all these wonderful authors. My name is Lindsay Bird, and my book is The Sun-Blessed Prince. It just came out last week, and it is about two countries that are at war, and it follows the prince of one of the countries who has the ability to resurrect the dead and also heal any wound. Somebody tries to kill him, and he realizes that the person who tried to kill him is blessed by the goddess of death, so they can just kill anybody with any touch. And he realizes there's not really much he can do to contain this person, and so he's trying his best to manage this assassin without letting anybody know he has this special ability, because if anybody finds out, he can't ascend to his own throne. So it's a political epic fantasy with a very, very slow burn, and it's the first of a duology.
That sounds so good. Hi, everyone. I'm Brittany Arena. My adult debut fantasy romance comes out on June 10th in the US and the 5th in the UK. And it's essentially about a girl who was once the king's prize dancer until he threw her in prison for a murder that he knows she didn't commit. Only for him to pull her out again 2 years later with an offer of freedom if she agrees to spy for him at a royal gathering. Of course, his orders become bloody and vicious, and soon she has to decide just how far she's willing to go to earn her freedom. And yeah, I'm just so happy to be here. I'm such a big fan of all these authors, so yay.
Oh, I think you're muted. Sorry, I was unmuting myself to tell you that you were muted.
Sorry about that. Hi, everyone. It's such an honor to be here, and especially among all these incredible authors. I've read many of your books, so it's honestly such a lovely time being here. I'm Shalini. I'm the author of This Monster of Mine, which came out on April 1st in the US and North America, and on April 3rd in the UK and everywhere else. This Monster of Mine covers the story of a young barmaid turned prosecutor by the name of Sarai, who returns to the extremely corrupt city in which she almost died 4 years ago in search for the man who pushed her off a tower. She only remembers his voice. It's all she remembers of the event. And she's back. She's ascended to, she's risen in status as a prosecutor, and she's hoping to hunt down the man responsible. He's assigned to work for one of the country's 4 ruling judges, and has the misfortune of ending up working with the most vicious of the 4, by the name of Kadra. And she recognizes Kadra's very distinctive voice as that of the man who was there the night he almost died, and resolves to destroy him at earliest opportunity. But as things are not what they seem in the capital, she starts to wonder whether she's the right man. And if she doesn't, then who is responsible? And yeah, that's my little pitch. Pleasure to be here.
That sounds like such a fun read. Hi, I'm CJ Dotson, and my book, The Cut, is a contemporary horror novel about a young mother named Sadie Miles who has just discovered that she is pregnant with her second child. And it forces her to come up against the understanding that she cannot stay with her abusive fiance any longer. So when he goes to work, she packs a bag for herself and for her 3-year-old daughter by her late husband, and they flee. And she winds up at a historic hotel that's down on its luck and past its prime. She gets a job as a housekeeper in the hotel and gets a free room to stay in for a little while she and her daughter get back on their feet. And so she thinks that her luck is turning around and everything's going to be fine. But on her very first night there, she sees someone struggling in the hotel pool and she runs down to help, and they are gone when she arrives. Her manager insists that no one's gone through the lobby all night, no one's been in the pool. But after escaping from her abusive ex, she has promised herself that she's not going to let anybody dictate to her what's real and what's not ever again. And she needs to make sure that this really is a safe place for her and her daughter because they have no other options right now. So she would need to make other plans. And so she begins to investigate as disappearances and discrepancies and strange behaviors mount in the hotel.
Okay, well, you guys are just destroying my poor TBR out here. It's fine. Hi, my name's Alex, and my book Blood Beneath the Snow just came out in March, actually, so it's already out. It's a new adult romantasy about a princess who lives in a world where everyone, for the most part, has magical abilities except for her, and those who do not have magical abilities are, people look down on them and treat them poorly. She has no magic, but she enters the competition against her 4 older brothers for the throne, where they will fight each other to the death, and the last sibling standing then takes the throne. She enters the competition and is determined to win, only to be pretty much immediately kidnapped by the enemy general of the country they're at war against. And she thinks it's all over, but he then tells her that he's actually kidnapped her to train her to win. So lots of political intrigue and fun enemies to lovers. But yeah, so that's my book. Thanks for having me.
So the first question that I want to have, and I had so many different questions that I actually had like a rough draft of of questions for this panel, and I had to kind of cut it down because I knew we wouldn't actually even get to all of the questions that I have. Um, I want to know from all of you, what was the first image of your book when it came to you in terms of inspiration? And I'm also interested if that changed during revision, editing, drafting. I know for a lot of people it stays the same and it's like that core memory never changes, but I'm intrigued to find out if it did. Kind of what did it change to? Lindsay, do you want to start?
So the core memory I have when I first think of like what the first image of the story is horrible. One of my main characters, the assassin who goes after the prince, has a horrible childhood. It's very dark and bleak, where essentially after in order to become a reaper, which is basically the person who can touch something and kill it with a single touch, they're blessed by the goddess of death. You have to die first. And so this character had a childhood death, and because the country that he was in basically just imprisons all the reapers because they don't want people who could just mass murder at a single touch running around, so just immediately put into prison. And so the image that I have is literally this 9-year-old child in a cage in the dark. And like that was the first thought of the book. Obviously he gets out, and it was then the meeting of him and the prince who has the ability to resurrect anything from the dead, and that interaction. So the first thought I had was this horrible childhood trauma, and then escaping that childhood trauma and finding that person who would be able to give comfort. So that was my first thought of the book.
Brittany, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I totally here for all the trauma. Mine also starts off with trauma. I saw the first scene very quickly, which is where Vasily is in prison. It's kind of the book opens when she's like first pulled out again, and I think I saw that at the time because it was a mirror to how I was feeling. Like I was going through a lot. That was when my health really I'm like terrible at expressions, is went off the rail in expression. It just, my health was awful at the time, and it like everything had flared. I didn't know what was wrong with me. I was unable to get out of bed. Like most of the time I was pretty much just bed bound for almost 2 years. And so I think like that just came to me because it's how I was feeling. I was feeling very trapped. I was feeling like I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe. And she kind of came to me, and then, once that image was in my head, like it kind of spurred a lot of questions. And, like, I don't know, I think I was like searching for my own way out of prison, my own way out of it. And yeah, and her story just kind of came to me. Like I totally just winged the first act of that book with like no plans, no idea what was going to happen. I don't really advise that. And I learned very quickly that I had to go back and plot. But, funny enough, the first act hasn't changed hardly at all. We've expanded and like cleared up some things. We've added some world building, but essentially, yeah, it's very, very close to what it was back in the day. Somehow, I don't know how, but somehow. Yeah.
I think that my first image was the very first time that Sarah and Kadra meet in public. There's a wee bit of a scene that happens before that, but the very first time they met in public was something that just did not leave my head. And it was, I was working as a lawyer at the time in corporate, which was draining the very life and soul out of me, and also just making me lose faith in a lot of lose what little faith I had left in a lot of institutions. And I guess at the time, this says a lot about my psychology, but I guess at the time I was sort of looking for this idea of this almost savior-like figure, someone who stood above the law, someone who saw the law for what it was and wanted to correct it. And so the very first image that I had in my head was um, of Sarai just looking up. She's like down on uh, on a stage arena, and he's above her on a platform, and of sort of her looking up at him rather than him looking down at her, and just this seeing this terrifying figure with the potential for to change so much, and simultaneously wanting to join hands with that power while also fearing it. And yeah, it kind of snowballed in my head from there, because I guess in my own personal life I was just sort of looking for someone to step in and point out that things were not going the way they should, and that laws were not protecting those they should, and no one was doing that. So I think there was some wish fulfillment there. And I'd also just been watching Shadow and Bone with Ben Barnes in it, and so I think a lot of it was me looking at Ben Barnes and going, well, maybe, my God, there was a decent amount of that in there. But after that, I discovered, like Brittany, that vibes are not enough, and I actually need to plot this thing. So actually, I just sat down, hunkered down, and it took me 14 months, even though writing that scene took me, I think, 1 day. And then the rest of the book took me 14 months. So vibes are lovely. They're not enough. But I'm very glad that they were able to sustain the rest of the rest of the book finally just came out the way it did, and came out well.
So the hotel in my book is set on really close to Lake Erie, and they used to have a view of the lake until the power plant got built in between them and the lake. And when I was younger, I used to hang out all the time at this one Lake Erie beach that was overlooked by a power plant. And I just stole that whole setting and put it directly in my book. We even called that beach the Cut when we were teenagers and in our 20s. And one time while I was there with my friends, and they didn't see this, and I'm sure there's like a totally fully normal explanation for it. I saw something in the water that was glowing, and I'm sure there's probably like freshwater bioluminescent life in the lake that and I'm deliberately not confirming that because I would rather believe that I saw something weird, right? But it was, have you ever been like driving down the highway at night and somebody throws their cigarette butt out the window, and you can see the cherry when it lands and the sparks, they scatter, and for an instant as they scatter, they're still lit up too. I saw something that looked just like that under the water. It was a point that scattered into sparks and faded, and it was glowing. And when I was trying to think of a new horror manuscript to get started on, that image kept coming back to me. And so I expanded everything from that one little moment.
I love that. I think the first kind of image I had of my book was of a girl who had a lot of brothers and they were like fighting, sparring. It was very like fantasy-esque. And I knew immediately that they felt more powerful than her and she didn't feel like she had any power in that situation as they were like just kind of sparring or whatever. And so that really appealed to me, like that kind of premise of a girl without powers in a world where, you know, she's royalty, so that should inherently give her a lot of power. And as I started digging deeper into it, I don't know, I've always been a really big fan of like the trials and deadly competition trope, and I thought that would fit really interestingly into a novel like that where, you know, the people competing for the throne are not strangers or even friends, they're siblings who are actually related to each other. And it brought forth this image of like this really brutal kind of world that I really wanted to explore. It didn't change a ton. One thing that did change from like when I first conceptualized it, though, when I first imagined it, the reason she did not have any abilities was because in this world, like in my head, the way I was thinking of it was a very patriarchal society where men had magic inherently and women did not. And eventually I did end up cutting that so that it just became there are some people with magic and some people without. The world building was just getting a little too tricky. I couldn't quite make all the puzzle pieces fit until I pulled that part out, and it went, oh, okay, now it all flows together a lot better. But yeah, that's the image that I started with.
Okay, now I want to ask a little bit more about kind of the genre part of the panel. So I want to know from you all kind of what draws you to the speculative fiction genre, right? Like what excites you about the genre? Why are you drawn to it? Maybe, you know, is this particular project? Um, you are drawn to this one. Brittany, do you want to start?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, like obviously it is an escape, but it's so much more than that. And I think all fiction offers like some degree of escape, but there's something in particular for me about like fantasy, science fiction, and so on, because it stretches your imagination in like the grandest of ways and with like worlds we can only dream of. And but yet it like still allows for so many truths. Like I still felt like I could, you know, put my real world experience with illness in it, but in a way that I could like handle it and like approach it again and almost like make peace with it. 'Cause I actually really struggle to read things in the real world or things that are too realistic. It feels traumatic for me, and so like yeah, this like opens up this avenue where I can actually like explore things and heal a bit in like a new setting and in a new way. So yeah.
Shalini?
Yeah, I think what I adore so much about fantasy and just yeah, fantasy, sci-fi, these big expansive genres in general is the way that it allows us to reflect portions of our world back in unusual, fragmented ways and question the nature of those things and how much sense it really makes if we take a long, hard look at it. I feel like that's something that those two genres in particular, you know, fantasy, sci-fi, actually even to a very large extent horror, reflect the absurdity of life, the absurdity of the mechanics of how we've structured society can be. And I think that's what draws me so much to these genres. Like Brittany said, I tend to I tend to have a hard time if things are extremely realistic or extremely contemporary, and I cannot, for the life of me, write anything contemporary because I feel like I do not know enough about the world to dare attempt to write about reality. Who's that? So it always feels weirdly more weirdly easier for me to just make up a world and go, well, I know everything about it because I set the rules here, and just I always like to think that and at least from what every book in the genre that I've read um, always finds a way to say something about our world, and I find that so necessary in these very trying times. But also a real testament to the power of fiction in making us, like Brittany said, you know, expand our imaginations, think more, think critically, and show us what is possible in ways that we often can't conceptualize when we're so entrenched in our own daily lives. But yeah.
I completely agree with everything that both Shalini and Brittany have said, especially in regards to using the speculative to hold up sort of a mirror to what's real. But I love speculative fiction in part for the escapism that it offers from the real world, because the real world is horrible. And I write horror, so maybe that sounds like, but the real world is horrible in ways that are real and can get you. Um, I've been talking, actually, I found myself talking a lot lately about T. Kingfisher's The Hollow Places, because I say that's a horror situation that I would jump into headfirst, like full knowledge that it's a bad world. If you show me a hole in the world, I'm going to go through it. I would do it. I would do it. I've been wanting it since I read the Narnia books as a child. I would go out of the world. And I think that for me, and I've kind of like started realizing this as I've been obsessively talking about that book again for some reason for so much lately. But for me, writing speculative fiction is kind of my way of jumping out of the world too. It's my way of getting out of the bad place, and maybe I'm going to a different bad place, but it's at least it's fascinating and interesting. Um, and yes, you can use it. And I think, if I'm not going to say should, because sometimes you just want fluff, but you can use it to look at the parts of the real world that are hard or beautiful or that need looking at. Um, but you get to do it from like a kind of a safe distance and out of this world. And that's what I really enjoy about it. Also, just real quick, I think it's so fun that you were saying that you, Shalini, that you like can't write contemporary, because I started with science fiction and fantasy. And when I switched to writing contemporary horror in 2020, because I didn't have enough bad, I guess, then, but it felt like cheating. Like it felt like so easy that it felt like I was cheating at writing somehow, because I didn't have to do the world. I love the world building, but I'm an obsessive planner, so it takes me a long time to get past that stage. So when I switched to contemporary speculative fiction, it felt like I was getting away with something. Okay.
I love that. I think my answer is probably just going to be what everybody else has said in like a slightly different font. Um, but here we are. I love so much about writing, particularly second world speculative fiction. I'm not a contemporary person, mostly because I get caught up in like knowing the details about the setting, and then I feel like I can't come back until I've either made it up in my head, which is faster than usually sitting down and trying to Google whatever I'm supposed to know about where the characters are. But one thing that I really love is, I don't know, like I as I've gone through life, I've come to different periods of time where I've had big questions about myself and what I believe and what really motivates me, like what things I'm passionate about. Um, and as a teenager, it was fantasy and science fiction books that helped me kind of figure that out, because it was less straightforward than someone coming to me and saying, "Here's the issue, like tell me what you think." It felt a lot easier to digest as a teenager when I was reading a fantasy book and it was, okay, Katniss, her sister just got picked for the Hunger Games. So what does she do? Does she volunteer? Yes, of course she volunteers. That felt a lot simpler to me, because I could put myself in the shoes of those characters. And that's continued on a lot through my writing, even. So I think about like having questions about myself and what motivates me. I If those questions are hard, I can give them to my characters and have my characters explore them in a fantasy world. And that feels not safer necessarily, but oftentimes step back and I realize, oh, I know exactly what I think about that issue. I know exactly what I think about this particular thing that's happening in our world, because I was able to give it to someone in a fictional world and then write out how they handled that situation. So I think that's, I don't know, I think that's one of the beautiful things about speculative fiction, is that you can take a step back from your own world, and that often, for me at least, allows a lot of clarity of mind to be able to take the issues at hand and formulate my responses to them, and then come back stronger and ready to move forward, and having a better sense of who I am and what I really believe in.
Yeah, I think just to piggyback off that, like everybody has said like so many amazing things, but I think that's really similar to what I believe as well, where I love a good metaphor. like, I feel so much of speculative fiction, it's a metaphor for something else real, where you can say, okay, she's been reaped for the Hunger Games. That trauma, that fear, that desperation is something that you can apply to other aspects of your real life. And because it's so extraordinary, you can make it more personal. And by comparing it to your own personal story without reading a book going, this person showed up to school and this is exactly what happened at school that day, where it's like, all right, well, that's what happened to that person. That's not the same experience that I had when I went to school. Where when it's fantasy or sci-fi or horror, any of the speculative stuff, you can sit there and say, like, this is something so completely otherworldly, but the emotions I'm getting from it and the experience I'm getting from reflecting on it is something I can relate to this very different but unique to me situation. And so I feel like the metaphor of speculative fiction is safer and more comforting and also more global as a result, because everyone can relate to those different types of stressors in different ways.
I just want to remind everyone watching that if you have questions, please put them in the live chat and I will remember to go back to them. I want to ask some more questions that are a little bit delving into specific books. The first one is definitely The Cut, which I tried to start right before bed and just like stopped. I was like, no, I can't. Like this is not bedtime reading. I thought it could be, but I don't know what I was fooling myself thinking that I could just like read this before bed and then just drift away into bed. I would love for you to chat about the psychological component. I found that not only is it kind of about the self-doubt, that your main character feels and the gaslighting, but also, as you're mentioning, kind of the psychological element of the horror specifically as well.
Yeah, it was really fun to, well, fun, interesting to write this horror novel that follows a woman who is, on the one hand, has escaped the very real horror of a domestic abuse situation, and on the other hand, has fled into the very fictional horror of a hotel with supernatural bad things going on in it. And what allows it to be tied together is the psychological like connection of the responses to these two different threats, and the way that Sadie, my main character, the way that her thought processes and beliefs about herself and what she's capable of and what the world is like, how that was impacted by both having been a victim of domestic abuse and having gotten herself out of that situation and gotten her daughter out of that situation. And how does that translate to the way she handles the goings on in Larpin Hotel? Um, and sort of one of the things that I keep coming back to with that I just want to like make, I want this to be one of the things that people take away is that Sadie has done this on her own. I've heard and I hate the phrase what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Um Sadie was not made stronger by her abusive situation. She was made stronger by finding the ability in herself to get out of it. And she has to rediscover that strength throughout the book. Um, and I think that is that tie, that aspect of the psychological element of the book is what I think made it all come together and work out.
Yeah, because I think as you're talking, it kind of crystallized this thought that I was having throughout, which is that, when she is discovering her strength and her voice again, it's kind of parallel to the memory she's having of her past and also the very real situation she finds herself in, which is not great. Um, and tries to figure out kind of like who she is now, right? Like, how can she react and interact now? The next question that I have is about the Sunblessed Prince and This Monster of Mine, because you both mentioned that you have some pretty powerful touch-based kind of um, physical connection kind of magic in your worlds. And I would love to know kind of about creating those world building structures, creating the rules, kind of systems behind that, and what inspiration you had specifically for kind of that magical spark. Um, as someone who is also not, as someone who also obsessively plans, I would like to know how that happened. Shalini, do you want to start?
Yeah, absolutely. So the magic system was honestly what took me the shortest amount of time when it came to writing. So I think my focus was because I shamelessly plug this every time I talk about how I world build, but I am a huge gamer, and everything I have learned about world building has largely been informed by how video games approach world building and the sort of user experience, just in terms of making information digestible, accessible, and compacting it in a way that people can follow along with the story, even if they're just hopping on for an hour or two just a game after work. And so Magic System to me was all about making things easily understandable, but also easily accessible. And so to that effect, I would often just use nouns but capitalize them just because I know that no one is going to memorize a 50 word, magic system with different words for everything. So I would just be like, this is a healer, but with a capital H, so you know something's up. And but I don't want to disappoint the epic fantasy folks who just go, who are seasoned veterans. They read this and they go, really. And so I threw a few runes in there. This idea that the magic in this book is based on the idea of you have magic in your blood. In order to activate it, quote unquote, you either draw a specific rune or you have like a bracelet with the runes engraved on it, and you like get the blood into the grooves of the rune. Boom, the rune flares. Boom, you can perform whatever it is you're supposed to do with that rune. And so I just tried to keep it nice and simple that way. And something I really drew from, especially when it came to world building, was ancient. This is my favorite thing, but like ancient, long dead civilizations. I just went on a crazy Wikipedia, Oxford Encyclopedia rabbit hole, and would look at how were those societies structured, what elements have they lost that we could perhaps use, like I could perhaps use in this book. And I think I was very lucky in the sense that I relied heavily on ancient Rome for my book. And ancient Rome is just a treasure trove of, we have so much knowledge on ancient Rome that it wasn't particularly hard to world build because we largest empire in the world at one point, and there's lots left over from their very, very conquer heavy reign that I could draw from. But I think what the biggest thing that helped me when I was world building was honestly, this is gonna sound so strange, but whenever I had any sort of grand idea or grand scheme, I would sort of draw it out to see whether it made sense at first. Is this something I can pass on to a reader? Is this something that's going to be digestible to a reader, or is it just something that's going to confuse them even more? And the second even if I just began drawing something rough on paper and I go, yeah, nope, I barely get it. No one else is going to get it. Then I would just shove it aside or keep it with me. But yeah, that was largely how I world built for this monster of mine, just to focus on making things making fantasy as accessible as possible from the perspective of, at the time, like a 8 to 6 corporate lawyer who was just tired every day and wanted to turn her brain somewhat off, but also engage it a little after working when reading. So
So for the Sunblessed Prince, I knew life and death were going to be like the major themes, and so the abilities for that came very quickly. I think what took a little bit more time and what was very heavily inspired by COVID was how people were treated when they had those certain abilities. And specifically with the givers who have the ability to heal any injury, any sickness, anything like that, that was very much from the essential workers. For all of the doctors who were just constantly on call during this pandemic, who were, anytime anything was happening, they were the ones that were just every day, all the time, healing everybody. Were doing their best to, given circumstances. And so what I really delved into is if you had somebody who could just heal anybody, just touch, you're healed, no more cancer, you're good. that would be somebody who would be very much exploited, because everybody would be showing up at their door all hours of the night, because if you stopped for 1 second, someone's going to be dead. And so how the givers were treated culturally was very much inspired by how the overworking of essential workers, the overworking of people who just, because you have the ability to do something, you're constantly being asked to do it over and over and over again. And so that was very much for the givers. And then when I looked at for the reapers, it was very much the opposite, where it's like, all right, these people can kill anybody with a single touch. Nobody wants them in society. Nobody wants them around. Nobody wants them there. How do you handle that? What are they dealing with? The fear people would have about any second you could die. And so I have, in one culture, they're just pretty much imprisoned and that's it, except when they're used as assassins. And in the other one, they're just literally dressed head to toe, no skin covering, because you don't want to accidentally touch their skin. They have to wear bells when they walk in public, so everybody knows where they are to alert the presence. A lot of that was actually inspired off of how people used to treat historic lepers, where the way that they would need to constantly cover their skin, Chichona, and the way that you would have to like take care of your body to try to like make the skin feel better. Like there's a lot in there of just like, how would society treat this? Because you don't want to be touching them. You don't want to be anywhere near them. And then also them themselves, they're constantly like, they can't be a part of society. They can't have those relations. What does that feel like when you're constantly being forced to be separate and othered, when you're not allowed to actually interact with anybody else, and what that would do to both the psyche and the body afterwards? And so that, I feel like the culture developed over time, where the magic was just very simple. I knew what the magic was from the start, but how people reacted to the magic, that developed afterwards.
Yeah, I love asking questions like that in terms of world building, speculative fiction, and craft, to kind of see how people approach how you create worlds. I know everyone has kind of chatted a little bit about kind of like, if the real world is too hard, like we'll make our, we'll make one ourselves, kind of. But then it, when you actually get down to the nitty gritties of how do you actually do that, it's really interesting to see how everyone kind of approaches it a little bit differently. Next, I want to ask about Blood Beneath the Snow and A Dance of Lies, because you both have interesting exchanges with our, like, quote, enemies, unquote, basically. And I would love to know if both of you could talk about these characters for new readers. So for readers, obviously, who haven't read the book, what drew you to these kinds of side characters, these characters? And I also kind of wanted to know, were they always the same, through drafting? I think that it's interesting for me to learn a little bit more about side characters in the terms of how they develop, either based on necessity or based on kind of where they're going as characters. Brittany, do you want to start?
Yeah, so now is when I get to gush about being a huge villain lover. I always loved them, particularly the Darkling, like who doesn't? Kylo Ren, Anakin, like just you name it. I'm such a big fan. And yeah, so I'll focus on Ilian for this question. Because, well, he's like, for those who don't know, he's the king of the West in the book. He's the one who was framed Vasily for murder, threw her in jail, only to pull her out again at the beginning of the book. And, he honestly came to me fully formed. I think it's because he had this eerie calmness and like almost like a suave confidence to him that was, I don't know, it was just like so alluring, like both alluring and unsettling to me. And there's like this addicting dynamic addicting for me at least, between him and Vasily. And, so when I like kind of put them together, everything just flowed so much that I honestly kept wanting to put more scenes of them together, and I like had to stop myself. But like, I love the type of dynamics in books where like it becomes this fascinating thing where you're like hanging on the edge of your seat to see who breaks first, who says what, who crosses the line. And yeah, and so, he really didn't change. I think he was just like I saw her, in my head very early. I saw their scene together very early, and it's like he just walked on the page fully formed. And I don't know if that was just the years of me loving villains, that he just kind of came to me as like I can't say that word, amalgamation of like all of the characters that I've loved so much. And then he also just kind of had his own, like, I feel like he was just so fully formed based on how he saw her. Like that really defined him, if that makes sense. So yeah, no, I'm such a villain fan, and I'm so eager to hear Alex's answer for this.
Okay, we're fellow villain lovers, so I think it will be pretty similar. Um, in Blood Beneath the Snow, so the enemy and love interest, because we believe that people can be two things in this house. Um, his name is the Hellbringer. So as I was creating him, I knew I wanted the book to have a very sweeping enemies to lovers romance. Um, I think something that's interesting about Blood Beneath the Snow is that it was the first book that I ever actually finished. I had written lots of other things beforehand, but when I first finished it, it was bad, as all first drafts are. But no, it was like really bad because I had never actually finished a book before. I went back and scrapped it and wrote it start to finish, I think 5 different times before I actually looked at it and was like, oh, okay, you could be a book. Like I don't just need to throw this in the garbage. There's actually something here. And then like the editing process, that was really where the Hellbringer came to life for me. At first, I was very much just learning as I wrote all these different variations of it. I was learning what the story was supposed to be about, what I was trying to communicate. And I think for me too, Revna, the main character, it's very much her story. So while there is a very sweeping enemies to lovers romance in it, my first like rounds of edits, my first drafts were all very focused on her. And then when I finally took a step back and I was like, okay, this works. Now I can edit it and make it actually good. I looked at the Hellbringer and I was like, okay, cool. You're a cardboard cutout, basically. I was just like sticking cardboard cutouts together and saying, kiss, like, now kiss. Um, so he needed like some actual stuff going on. I was like, okay, you're a real person. I should probably give you some actual motivations and things. But one thing that I think worked very well, at least as I was building him out and as he became more of a real person to me, is I wanted there to be a big separation of identity between them, but I also wanted them to feel like they were the only people who could understand each other. I love enemies to lovers romances that do this. And so part of what appealed to me was that she was this princess, this royal who, had lived this kind of glamorized life, but was looked down on by all of her people because she didn't have any abilities. Whereas he is a general, he wears a mask, he can't show his face because his magical ability is that he can kill people with just a thought. So it makes him very capable and very feared. So he like keeps the mask on so that no one can assassinate him. Hopefully, is the idea. And so they really hate each other at first. They feel like they live these very different lives. But as they go on, as the romance developed, it became very clear to me that okay, both of you are being used as pawns in the games of these other people who have more power over you, even despite your magical abilities or lack thereof. And once they started like saying those things to each other, it became clear to me that that was really where the spark was. Um, they should have hated each other. They were on opposite sides of a war. They're very different. He's they're both equally grumpy, I think, but he's maybe more so. Um, and just yeah, as I was able to dig into that, they both had the same core emotional wound at the center, and so that was really what helped them kind of click together and made the romance come alive once I got to that stage of edits and made the Hellbringer himself actually, a three-dimensional character and not a Barbie that I was saying just kiss. So
I have to say that makes me want to read it even more. I'm so excited. And I'm also with you like on villain romances and like obviously I can't say anything about my current book, but like every other book I've ever written is like a hardcore villain romance. Like the next one I'm working on is too. So I'm just like so excited. We have so many like-minded people here.
100% with you on the villain loving train. So I feel that.
The next question that I have is for everyone, and I want to know, keeping with the speculative fiction theme, if you could go back and give yourself a piece of advice at the beginning of your writing journey, whenever you want to go back to, what piece of advice do you think you would give your past self? CJ, do you want to start?
Sure. I've known that I wanted to be a writer since I was 9 years old. So academically, like I mean, from elementary school on, I really focused on English, and I was an English major in college. And I don't feel like being an English major actually benefited my writing that much. I think that reading widely since the age that I could read, I, c- I, c- I could not tell you the name of almost any grammar rule. I just use the grammar rules. I just do, it's because I read so much. I kind of have a sense for what to do and what not to do most of the time. I don't feel like my English degree I love every English class I took was fun. But I think that if I could go back and give myself some advice, it would be to major in probably history, or mythology or something. Some Lindsay's laughing because she was a historian, right? Or is a historian. Yeah. No. um, but no, I just feel like my problem isn't if I have a problem, my problem isn't and has never been the act of writing itself and the stuff that you kind of need English major stuff for. I mean, I loved it. Again, writing essays for English classes was like one of my favorite activities. I did not get out much. But in terms of understanding people or seeing the bigger picture when you're having big world events or knowing what like just having ideas, having frames of reference, having some sort of like I've seen the cause and effect for this sort of action play out in in my studies in this way and that way and the other way. And so I think that in terms of having ideas or having uh, I'm sorry, I'm losing what I'm saying. In terms of having ideas or in terms of knowing how I want to take a story, I think that if I had studied history or even mythology or religion or something beyond just English, it would have given me more fertile ground. In the same way that you hear a lot of like, write what you know. Um, and it's not always easy to go out and have life experiences that can lend themselves to certain types of fiction writing. Um, I wish that I had studied something other than English in college.
I just want to respond quick. um, I feel like you just spoke to my inner child because what I was going to say was I wish I had taken an English course when I was in college. Because I did major in history and I had the option to double major, and I was like, it's too much work. I don't have the time to fit it in, and so I never took it. And I always that was something I always felt guilty of was I never took a writing class. I never took a English class beyond like the core first year classes. And something I've always had like a little bit of interior shame of was like, oh, I'm just the imposter who somehow managed to, string a sentence together. And I was like, everyone's taken these masterful courses, and I just kind of, showed up as a blurbo one day, like, I have a book. And like, yes, I've been writing for many years, but I was never formalized, and so I was always so scared that I never took an English class. So thank you, CJ, for telling me that I did the right career track. I chose history. I did the right thing. Because no, while you were talking, I never would have written this book if I hadn't been a historian of medicine who was aware of, all the different complexities of life and death. And there's so much science in this book. Like, yes, it's fantasy, but like I explain my fantasy in a very scientific way. And so like this book would not have been written if I wasn't a historian of medicine, and did the career track that I did. So now that I can't say that I wish I'd gone into an English major, I think I'll just say it's hard because I don't think if I'd been given any other advice, I would have written the book I did. And I'm very proud of the work that I did. So I think advice to somebody else is to just keep writing. I think so often it's very easy to get discouraged. It's very easy to have people tell you you're never going to go anywhere. It's nepotism to get published. You're never going to, get the deal. Just go get a real job. That I think just keep writing. And the more you write, the more that you continue to practice your craft. Even if you never get trad pub, if you enjoy the process of writing and you enjoy telling stories, that's what it should be really focused on versus I'm going to get the deal with a bunch of money. Like, just enjoy the actual craft. And as long as you enjoy the craft and continue to do that, I think that's the best part of it.
Yeah, I was just gonna say something similar actually. One of my pieces of advice that I would give myself is writing is a craft, publishing is a business. Learning the difference between those things, I think, is very crucial if you do want to go into publishing and be published one day. I think I'd also tell myself that, I don't know, there's the time's going to pass either way. Being published takes a really long time, whether you self-publish, whether you traditionally publish. It takes a long time to actually sit and write enough words to call something a book in the first place. And then if you traditionally publish, you have just like endless waiting for rejections and more things like that. And I definitely would go back and tell myself, there, it feels like there's a rush. At least I always felt like there was a rush, because that was where I wanted to be, was where I saw all of my other favorite authors going. And I think I would tell myself, the time's going to pass either way. So you can write more books if you're sitting there waiting. That's what I did during all my waiting time, was I wrote more books, and I got better and I improved my craft while I was waiting for what felt like the business side of things to catch up with me. And I think the last thing I tell myself is that no word is ever wasted. I need to tell myself that today as I go through and work on my edits, and just like highlight giant chunks of words and then hit backspace and cry a little bit inside. But as many times as I had to rewrite my debut before I actually looked at it and went, oh, okay, this is a book. None of those times were wasted. It was just the choice of, do I want to grow with this book that I'm writing? Do I want to set it aside and keep growing with the next book I write? Because it does take time to be a writer. Someone at a writing conference I went to once said, I think they were paraphrasing a quote from someone else too, but all the people who want to be writers are the people who started out as readers. And so by the time you get to where you want to start writing, you're a professional reader and a novice writer. So it's easy to look at your own work and say, as a professional reader, I can tell myself that this really sucks. And that's okay. Like, it takes so many words to get to a point where you can read your own work and not hate it, at least in my case. And every one of those words is worth it if you're feeling passionate about them, if you're feeling like that's what you really want to do. So yeah, that's my advice.
I'm gonna piggyback on what Lindsay and CJ and Alex have said. Especially there's no wasted words. I strongly I strongly feel that, because if I could go back, I would definitely tell that to my 18-year-old self, who somehow thought she was going to get a six-figure deal in 5 months. Rest in peace to that to that silly creature. But so I had these enormous dreams straight out of high school. Like, I knew I wanted to write. I had a completed manuscript. Started querying and got humbled by reality, the sassy queen that she is. And I gave up. I gave up for 7 years. I just got so, I took all of the rejection and made it all about me, of course. And immediately just hunkered down. I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to pursue a career I've never wanted to do, and I do not see myself in for a long time, but it will pay the bills, and therefore I shall. And yeah, I think if I could go back, I would tell her, first of all, rejection is something you're going to have to get used to in this business. And second of all, what are you doing? Why are you wasting your tuition money? but but at the same time, listening to Lindsay and CJ talk, I'm realizing now that, the book that I have written, which is very much so justice and law focused, would not have been possible without those years that I have for the longest time considered wasted, that I spent in law school, and then law school, and actually working the job. And so it's been very healing and very humbling to listen to everyone talk and realize that, maybe I didn't waste 7 years of my life, running from rejection. Maybe this allowed me to accumulate the experiences I need in order to write the book that I have written. And yeah, it feels like those years weren't wasted, those words weren't wasted. And so I'm going to echo just everything that Lindsay and CJ and Alex have said, just like in spades. So true and so real. And that if any writer is, feeling disheartened and just struck down by the querying process, as it does, to just look at all of us and know that we were all there, and we're probably all shed a tear, many tears, over the course of the querying and the submission process, and keeping trying, and like looking at our imposter syndrome and saying, like, not right now, just not right now. And every day that we spend putting one foot in front of the other and going forward is a day where imposter syndrome and all the fear and all the doubt doesn't win. And I think that is what I would love to tell my younger self my very anxious younger self, even myself as of yesterday. What I would love to tell her the most. She doesn't always listen, but yeah.
I will piggyback off of that as well. I agree that no word is wasted, and I want to almost like implore that no pain is wasted too. I spent years of my life, I'm still in pain every day, like high amounts of physical pain. But what I have learned and how I've kind of made peace with it is realizing that not a minute of me laying in bed or struggling or feeling like the amount of pain that I do, all the treatments I went through, none of that is wasted because it hasn't only spurred my drive, but it's like given me new perspective on things. That's when some of my best, craziest story ideas have come. Like whenever had like multiple IVs in my arm and I had nothing else to do but to use my imagination because that was how I made it through the day. And yeah, and so I would say that the same is true for just any of our experiences. No experience is wasted, no pain is wasted, no words is wasted. So if you're living like a life where you feel like, oh, I should have done this sooner, or you have regrets on what path you went into, I would just say that like don't think that way, because you'll be surprised at like how your unique experience will contribute to your future in like really beautiful ways often. And also to add on to like what everybody's saying about degrees, I was terrified to write for a really long time because I thought I couldn't do it. I thought I had to have an English degree or, like a very specific type of degree to be able to write. I thought I had to like have just a lot more knowledge like than I did. I never felt like I was all that smart. And it wasn't until I literally had nothing else to do because I was so sick. I had nothing else in my life. And I just like went for it because I have always loved telling stories. And so I would say if you're somebody who's afraid of writing because you're worried that maybe you don't have the right background for it, like, yes, all of these backgrounds can contribute to it, like these amazing degrees. Oh my gosh. And like, I can't wait to read all these stories. But I would say that also like just your unique experience and perspective on life is enough. And you can learn craft, like you can learn all this. You can do research for whatever you want to put in your story. So I would just say, like, just ditch the fear and ditch the worry that you made wrong choices and that something has been wasted, because you are enough as you are. I promise.
Well, that is like the exact perfect way to end our panel. I loved the answers to these questions so much today, and specifically also the last question. I've left everybody's link to their book, the bookshop link, in the description box below. So definitely go pick up the ones that are already out and pre-order the ones that haven't come out yet. As you all can tell from our enthusiasm for everybody else's books, we are all excited for everybody's books and everyone's story concepts and worlds. Thank you everyone for watching. Thank you to the authors for joining me today. And I hope everyone has a really great rest of your day. Bye.